It was the last thing I remembered before my dad's passing. The first time I saw it. This is part 3. Previous parts is in the description. Far too long to have been concealed. The man pretended not to see it for a moment as the accordion rolled. Once the man noticed the tree trunk, he exploded with a face of eureka. The hand pointed its index finger straight to the sky and the accordion played a tone signaling a wonderful achievement. The hand's finger waved rapidly and the man stared darts into the sleeping deer as he licked his lips. The ragtime tune played again as the man's head playfully bobbed back and forth as he approached the deer from across the stage, giving the impression of dancing. He was right in front of the deer puppet. It raised and fell with the sound of its snores. I feared what I was about to see, but I physically couldn't avert my eyes. The hand raised far above the man's head, and like a cobra, snapped around the helpless deer. The deer's screams sounded human. They ached from its vocal cords like the helpless squeal of an elderly woman. The man's face still pantomimed his joy to the accompanying song. He dragged the panic-stricken deer up the trunk of the tree with great effort. The curtains closed as the scene continued above the theater. The deer, pleading for its life and the man's disembodied head stood alone. The man loaded his head far from the deer, his jaws wide open to display both rows of teeth. With the whip of his neck, he snapped his jaws down on the deer. The accordion stopped immediately. I again tried to run, close my eyes, stop myself from viewing the scene in any way, but nothing could be done. The only sound was the clapping of teeth around skin. The rip of flesh and muscle from bone. The shrill screeches of a person already sentenced to death, and the pop of fresh tendons between molars. Clap of teeth, rip of muscle, screech of death, pop of tendon. Clap, rip, screech, pop, clap, rip, pop. Until the man had his fill and his face was soaked in blood. He turned, and his eyes met mine. Astonishment widened his eyes and gaped his lips. I was sure it matched mine like a mirror. The head descended back onto the stage. The curtains drew again with a crinkle to show a bathroom cut from construction paper. A shower of water poured from above the theater and over the man's blood-stained head. The water rinsed the blood from his face in streaks. Clumps of hair washed from his head as well. Hair by hair, clump by clump fell from his face to reveal his identity. My identity. In painfully aching words through my own menacing jaws he whispered. What have you done? I awoke to the glint of dawn peeking beneath my blinds. A damp halo soaked the case of my pillow. I shot up and scanned my surroundings, desperately searching for the puppet theater I just saw moments ago. But I was alone and in the spare bedroom of my grandma's house. Somehow I must have made my way home and into my bed. I must have slept so heavily that I didn't recall, but my eyes were anvils. They pleaded for sleep with a constant sting. Confused, I eased myself out of bed. As I moved I noticed more than just the pillow was damp. I flung the comforter off of my body to verify the strange liquid. Relief washed over me as I saw the liquid was not a maroon stain of blood but clear. I didn't allow myself the time to decide if it was water or sweat. I knew the puppet show was not as simple as a dream. It felt as real now as it did in the attic last night. I knew any time I shed a tear it would call to me again, as if I opened the door and welcomed it into my mind. I couldn't live with that possibility. I knew I had to put an end to it. I put an ear to my bedroom door. I inspected the sounds of my grandmother's house to see if she was awake. She would always be up at the crack of dawn slaving away on that morning's breakfast. The aroma of pancakes and bacon didn't waft through the crack under my door. Strangely, the hiss of the showerhead pouring its water met my ear. She usually took her showers in the evening, but her routine could be broken from time to time. I used the running shower to cover the slap of my bedroom window from her ears. I was on my way to destroy the puppet theater and find my mom. The streets were empty that morning. The driveways were left vacant from the adults' morning commutes. Their children slogged through the remaining few weeks of school before Thanksgiving vacation. Birds cooed their morning hymns from the power lines dangling above my journey. The last lonely crickets bowed a methodical melody against the violins of their legs. Dew speckled the yards and dazzled in the sun's peak above the hill crests behind me. It was a cool morning, made cooler by the breeze that rolled against my walk. The tree leaves flipped in anticipation of an oncoming rain. A rain that announced its presence in the form of an aroma, and the midnight clouds that crafted the canopy above my destination. I continued until its darkness snuffed out the sun and I was in front of the house. I walked down the overgrown walkway to the front door, guided by the gentle brush of tall grass against my dangling forearms. The porch steps squealed under my weight. The crack of thunder introduced a light drizzle of rain that patterned against the house's shingles. My nerves rattled with fear throughout my body. I closed my eyes and focused on subduing them with a firm grip. Once again, I opted for the Band-Aid approach. I grabbed the door knob and twisted it with no further thought, but it didn't budge. I shoulder-bumped the door with the assumption that it would open to no avail. I fished through my pockets for my keys but only found my dad's knife. I must have misplaced them since I was in the attic the night before. The wind whistled past the side of the house and caused the blue tarp to whip and crackle. I trudged through the grass. Each stem, like a brush, painted my legs with their recently acquired rain. I gripped the tarp with both hands and yanked at it until it ripped from the nails holding it. As it fell to the grass it unveiled my old bedroom window frame. A few daggers of glass still clung to their original position. Not a surprise to me as I remembered it was broken somehow. But what was a surprise was the nails hammered into the window that clamped it shut from the outside. I ducked through the window frame, being careful to avoid the points of the surviving shards. Once inside, it was quiet. All that could be heard was the patter of calm rain and the occasional pop of a mature house settling into the shifting earth. The strange musk reintroduced itself to my palate. It was a subtle note of disgust, but it made my lip curl nonetheless. The closet door was only a few feet away. A taste of fear came to me. I could feel a wisp of cold mist brush over my bones. A warning in the form of a chill telling me to leave that place. To not dig any further than I already had. To go back to my grandma. I thought back to the night before. How the accordion was hushed by the idea of confiding in her. If I had continued, could it have silenced entirely? A foolish thought. The puppet show had already broken through my resolve. It wouldn't have let me go entirely. But as I stood just in front of the closet door, there was no accordion seeping into my head. No pounding demands to return in the form of a song. I could have turned back and told my grandma what was going on. How brave it would have been. But in my 10-year-old mind, bravery was a duel between good and evil at high noon. My mom was still missing. And I felt sure that the puppet theater had a hand in it. My cerement was an imaginary cowboy hat, red handkerchief tied at the neck, and a big iron strapped to my hip. I opened the closet. The closet was nearly barren. The clothes hung in my new closet at Grandma's house, the cowboy bed set resting beneath them. All that remained was a metal bat laying across the floor. I was under no illusion that I could one day make the baseball team. I had the strength for it, but I was far too uncoordinated. Still, I was glad to see it. I picked it up and choked the grip with clenched fists. The rain picked up its tempo and a boom of thunder interrupted the rapid taps. With a swallow, I climbed the wooden ramp until I was within reaching distance of the square plywood separating me from the puppet theater. Without further thought, I pushed the plywood into the dark attic with the end of the bat and hoisted myself into the void. I flipped the light switch on. Again, just a corner of pink poked into the light. I crept closer. The squeal of floorboards was masked by the intensifying rain just above my head. My foot kicked something hard that sent the unknown object pattering against the floor. I winced as though the sound would alert the theater in some way. I looked down to identify the object as my flashlight. In a swift motion I scooped it up into my grasp and went to click it on. The theater was just as I left it. The pink theater with blue and gold detailing made into a shrine to my past. The blue tarp dangled above the stage. The black screws fastened to the wood haphazardly. The mural of the puppet boy defaced by red spirals plastered over the strings. It was all the same as the night before. All except for the object resting on the slice of stage left unmasked by the tarp. My favorite multicolored pen that I hadn't seen since the night of the first puppet show dipped in crimson red blood. In the back of my mind I knew the additions to the puppet theater were a mirage. A collection of tricks by the theater to break my resolve and sink its strings into me. At the moment I had no idea why the pen would be bloodied, but that didn't prevent the dull hammer of dread from smashing a crack into my feigned courage. Then, just as the theater planned, in seeped the accordion. I wasted no time before charging at the theater, my bat raised above my head ready to smash it to pieces, but it took me. It took me back to a puppet show I had watched many months ago. This one depicted the bear as it stalked the sleeping deer. Many shows started the same. Show after show the bear would push any obstacles out of the way so he could see the deer. The theater took the show away in an instant. Like ripping pretty wrapping paper from a foul truth. It was me in the position of the bear that stared at my mother as the deer. It was me that watched her from a crack in the door after giving all of my effort to shoving the dresser just far enough to have a peek. The furniture used to barricade etched their path into the floor each night. It continued until I was tossed in my room one night. The door slammed shut followed by a metallic slap. I was trapped by the silver bolt lock drilled into the doorframe from the outside of my bedroom door. I screamed and banged on the door as I begged to be let free. The deer that cooed on the other side was my mother begging for my forgiveness, saying she had to for our safety. I shook my head to rattle my brain back into my control. Lie! I shouted. The image it conjured for me made my chest boil in a confused rage. I slammed the bat down over my head and cracked the puppet theater. Splinters exploded from the harsh impact, but yet it stood. The accordion still played, and I raised the bat above my head. Immediately, the theater took me back to another puppet show. This time the bear struggled to escape his cage. He found a stick and smashed it against the cage again and again and again until it shattered. The little bear then scurried through the newly created hole in his cage, to taunt the deer with a constant stare through her clear cage. Again, the show was ripped away and I was replaced with the bear. I descended from the attic and into my room. I was trapped on one end by a bolt lock and another by a window clamped shut by a cluster of nails hammered into the window frame from the outside. A desperate attempt by my mom to keep me at bay. As though I was commanded, I took the bat from my closet and swung it at my window. It cracked and splintered, and finally shattered. Shards of glistening glass sprayed from the windowpane. I crawled through and made my way around the house to watch my mother rest through her bedroom window. My consciousness returned to me, the bat still loaded above my head. Lie. Crack. The theater caved inward from the blow. Pieces flew into the air like shrapnel. But it still stood. The accordion still played. I raised my bat to deliver a final, crushing blow when it took me back again. The first puppet show. An innocent beady-eyed deer slept peacefully. The bear comically snuck towards it. In the end the deer was left with a trickle of red running from the corners of its mouth like tears of betrayal caused by the hole stabbed in its throat. The theater again placed me in the role of the bear. I stood at the precipice of my parents' bedroom. They slept soundly together. My mom faced away from the door on her side. My dad laid flat on his back. I crept into the room with care not to alert them to my presence. I did as I was forced to do. what was left was my dad choking. He gasped for air but only gargled on the pool of blood that filled his mouth until it overflowed in thin streaks at the corners. His desperate efforts to return to air only made the object half-submerged in his esophagus shake back and forth like tight spirals. In his throat twitched my favorite multicolored ink pen with the bright red cam pressed down. Crack! I was taken back again. The bear stretched in my face from far behind the stage. "What should we do with her?" it said. "Put her in the bear cave," I whispered. The theater ripped the scene away, leaving crack. 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 The theater exploded into bits with each swing. It crumbled onto the floor and the accordion quieted in my mind, but I didn't stop. I wanted to swing until it was pulverized to dust. Until I could blow it away, scatter it to the wind. I swung and swung until my energy was depleted and I collapsed on the ground and gasped for air. I looked over at the rubble I made of the puppet show. There was no blue tarp. No twirling, red spirals on the painting, no little back screws in the wood and no pen dipped in my dad's blood. I wasn't sure if what it showed me was true, or if the replacement of my puppet show memories was a trick like the additions to the theater. All I did know was that it was over. I may have laid there for hours listening to the rain patter against the shingles. The white noise, untainted by the accordion, was soothing. Although the images the puppet theater forced me to see in its dying moments replayed in my mind, I was relieved that it was over. But, the more times the theater's desperate flashes replayed in my head, the more real they felt. They felt less like attempts at deceit and more like genuine memories until I could practically feel the warm spatter of my dad's blood on my wrist. More pieces came to me on the attic floor as well. My mother was awoken by her husband's gargled cries. She sluggishly sat up and rubbed the sleep from her eyes with her hand. When her eyes opened, it was like the curtains rising on the next 2 years of misery. All of which seemingly at my blood-speckled hand. She would recite her line to any cop or nosy neighbor brave enough to question her. He tripped while holding a pen. The great lie my mother crafted about an hour after the pen was planted in his throat. I remembered watching her dust my prints from the pen before she slammed my door shut and hearing the thud of my dad's body to match the bruises before I dozed asleep. The police bought it, or at least believed it enough to not spend any more time in our impoverished part of town. The memories came with a realization. My mom's lie was to protect me, only for me to spend the next 2 years tormenting her. The thought misted my eyes, but I quickly flicked them away. I couldn't risk cracking my feigned courage again, even though the theater was no more than rubble. Beneath the fragile shell of courage was just a boy who wanted to see his mom again. Even if she never wanted to see me again, I knew I had to keep looking for her, to tell her I was sorry. My only hope for clues was in the remaining pages of her journal. I forced myself off of the ground as my newly found guilt attempted to hold me down. Before I turned out the light, I turned to get a final look at the remnants of the puppet theater. Perhaps it was a trick of the dim light, or a final dying attempt at deceit, but it seemed to move. A faint twitch towards a central cluster of broken wood. I paused my glare on the remains to see if it would move again. I could feel a creeping sense of fear overcoming me as I waited, but I didn't see it again. With a click of the light switch I banished the attic in total darkness and sealed it away behind the thin, square plywood. Upon re-entering the main floor of the home I was again reintroduced to the subtle musk that lingered through the air, but it was not my concern. My mom's journal, simply titled 2007, laid on her bedroom floor. Its pages sprawled and some bent from its jump out of my lap the evening prior. I rescued it from the floor and set it on my lap. I rummaged through the pages in search of her final entry. I hoped to find some location she would be heading to. Some well-thought-out exit plan that would give me an address or at least a direction to look. As the scribbles abruptly ended in blank pages, I turned back to her final entry. Her final words. September 9, 2007. I couldn't bear to hear Barry cry anymore. He was going to sleep in his bed again no matter what. I hear him coming down from the attic now. Barry, if you ever find this, I know it's not you in there. I'm so sorry for how I treated you. I love you. What had I done? The question pounded in my head. A knife of dread stabbed at my chest. I slammed the book shut as though I would recapture the words and remove them from my memory. My mind raced from one thought to another. I wouldn't have done anything to my mom. I would never have killed my dad either. This can't be real. None of this can be real. I must be in another one of its tricks. The puppet show must have me somehow. My mom would have gotten away, she would have hid. Like the clapper of a church bell, the final images from the puppet show rang. Put her in the bear cave. I turned to my mother's closet. With a click of my flashlight, the door knob was in light. It shimmered with the beauty of a siren. I regretted each step I took towards the closet. The old floorboards begged me to stop with each step. To turn back and never return. But I felt I had to know the truth. I took the knob in my palm. Its brass material was cool to the touch and transferred its chill through my body. I twisted the knob and with a sickening pop, the closet was revealed. Put her in the bear cave. The musk grew stronger. I shoved a pathway through the luggage bags and parted the clothes to reveal the wood panel, fastened into place by a single, sickening black screw. I pulled my dad's knife from my pocket and flicked the blade out. The brown specks that blemished it now made my stomach churn. I carefully set the blade in the screw head and began to twist. The wood groaned with each rotation. I wished the little black screw was a mile long. That I would sit there for hours twisting, and twisting, and twisting without being confronted by what it was concealing. But eventually enough of the threading was removed from the panel, and it fell inward with a thud. Put her in the bear cave. I smelled her first. The pungent odor charged through my nostrils like a platoon with raised bayonets that stabbed at the back of my throat. My eyes watered as I immediately recoiled from the assault. The sickening flavor of death seeped onto the back of my tongue and made me retch. I sat in it for a moment to gather my composure. I just needed to see what it was. I lit my flashlight and aimed into the cubby. A pile of leathered flesh sat in the orange glow of the flashlight. Each strand was ripped and tattered like the velvet of a puppet, skinned by the edge of a dull knife. I leaned in. Just enough to get a glimpse around the corner. Her musculature was shrunk to the bone. Bits of it were missing into the bellies of rats. All that remained somewhat intact was her feet. But the skin still receded to show the bruised outlining of veins. I butchered her. Skinned her like an animal. And I wish I never would have remembered it, but it came to me like every other memory. I heard her cries for mercy when my hand caught the wood panel. Her emaciated body wasn't strong enough to hold the panel shut against my weight. She whispered something through the air between us. Something mumbled through trembling lips that I could now understand. Please, Bear, please stop. This isn't you. Please. Her voice had more love in it than I deserved, but that was my mother. Then I sunk the tip of the knife into her flesh. I heard her screams as piece by piece her skin was removed by my dad's dull pocket knife. And when it was over, I heard her frantic breathing through an adrenaline-filled state that wouldn't allow her to die just yet. I just got up, buried the knife in my dad's sock drawer, and went to my room to wait for the theater to release me in the morning. I hyperventilated and vomited into the cubby. Every foolish idea of courage that brought me to the little black screw was cursed by my thoughts as I gripped my hair with tight fists, ready to tear them from their follicles. I couldn't handle this alone and I hated myself for believing I could. I thought back to my grandmother the night I snuck into this horrible place. I wish I had called her after she disappeared behind the click of the door. I wish I had asked her all of the questions that raced in my head. I wish I had the courage to be vulnerable with her. I threw my imaginary, courageous cowboy image in the recesses of my mind and cried as I ran far from that house and to my grandma's. My lungs burned after the run across town. I gasped for air in between wavering breaths. My vision distorted through the tears. I ran up to my grandma's porch and dabbed the tears that clung to my eyelashes away with the collar of my shirt. With my vision restored, I noticed that her front door was already ajar. I eased it open and the hinges squealed with every inch it moved. "Grandma? Grandma!" I called out, desperate for a response. There was no lingering smell of bacon and pancakes from her breakfast. No game show rambling on the TV about the price of a microwave. And no response from my grandmother. Only the sound of a hissing showerhead, still running from that morning. I stepped into the living room. Water trickled under the bathroom door. The puddle extended its reach down the hallway and encircled the feet of a ladder that stretched into the attic like the trunk of a tree. Something glimmered at the foot of the attic ladder. I slowly approached it. My feet sloshed in the soaked carpet as I picked up the glistening object. "My keys." "Grandma?" I said, though my feeble words were snuffed out by the hiss of water. With no other clue as to where she might be, I climbed the ladder. I forced my legs to take each step with more effort than the last. Once I was at the top, I shined my flashlight around in the darkness until I found her. Or at least what was left of the deer that the bear devoured. As that memory came to me, the accordion again played its terrible song. I write this from a library a few blocks from my old house. I spent 17 years running from the song. I traveled as far as I could to prevent the temptation to give in. I thought I might be able to read as a distraction from the distorted noise as it grew ever louder. When it inevitably grew too loud to concentrate, I thought I could turn myself in to the police and be unable to return, but it wouldn't let me. Each time I thought about it, the theater would conjure up the disturbing images I made of my mother and my grandmother until I abandoned the thought. Eventually I broke. In a futile attempt to find peace, I burst my eardrums with a pencil. Yet the accordion still played. After years of trying to think of ways to escape, it drowned out every thought I had. I returned to burn the place to the ground a few hours ago, but by now the fire must have been quelled, and yet the sound still splits my head. I am so taken by the puppet theater now that even if it is reduced to ash, I am under its control. So now I will return to it. I can't take the sound anymore. After this I will keep my composure and I will not let it in again. If I hurt any of you, or anyone that you love, please, know that I am sorry. Thank you for watching. Check out more videos. Please like and subscribe.